I've been rehearsing for weeks. No, Ace is, as always, accurate. But it wasn't that I said I wouldn't write any more nonfiction. I said I'd never do another biography, and the reason is because it's just such total immersion. And I had two exceptions to that. One was that if Merle Haggard were to call up, and it would have been a disaster. And if he were to call up and he says, Pete, I've been reading some of your work, and it's not too bad. And I think maybe we could do something together. I would have felt compelled to do it because he was such a brilliant person. The other person that I would have given anything to do a book with, who talked to me all the time when I gave him the Sam Cooke, Dream Boogie, he said, well, this is pretty good, Pete, but when are we going to do the book? This was Solomon Burke. And that book would have been entirely in his voice, and it would have been amazing. Now, he had died by 2015. But the trouble with Solomon was he was just the most amazing, probably the most charismatic person I ever met. He and Sam Phillips were the two most. But he was the kind of person who could say, listen, come on out to Los Angeles, we'll do this or that. I'll send you a ticket. Now, never take a ticket from Solomon. You never knew what that meant. But you also never knew if he'd be in Los Angeles. He might be in, Timbuktu for all you knew then. So anyways, I didn't do that. But Colonel tricked me into writing what turned out to be at least a mini. It's only 300 pages, the biography part, and then the letters. Alexandra, this book had its origins 30 years ago. And I had written Last Train to Memphis. It came out in '94. And Jack Soden, who was the CEO of Graceland and still is at Graceland, called me up and he said, if you would have asked me the same question that you've been asking me for the last 5 years, and the question was to get into the archives, which as it turned out were Colonel's archives, because he kept everything. This is a collection worthy of the Smithsonian. I mean, this is not worthy of the old Smithsonian. This is not just confined to Elvis or Colonel. This is an incredible archive of 20th century entertainment. But anyway, he says, if you would ask me the same question, you'd get a different answer. So not being totally dumb, I asked him the question, and he said yes. And Alexandra and I went in there. The archives Colonel's archives had been bought by Graceland maybe 3 or 4 years earlier, and they were sitting in this vast cavernous warehouse in the same dented file cabinets and traveling trunks that Colonel had kept them in. I mean, they were quite orderly. It's just we didn't know the order. But we started looking at letters, and we would be calling out to each other, look at this, look at that, because the letters revealed a Colonel Parker that I had known him at that point for 7 or 8 years.
Peter, was this before Careless Love, or was this?
It was before Careless Love.
Okay.
But it revealed a Colonel. I mean, I had known Colonel for maybe 6 or 7 years at that point, and I knew him. I didn't know him intimately, but I knew him fairly well. But this revealed so much more depth, so much more acuity, so much more brilliance, so much more humor, and so much more genius than any. I mean, I didn't get this all at once, but it was just an astonishing. It was like walking into Ali Baba's cave. So the book was supposed to be a book of letters. And I went to Jack Soden and I said, we've got to do a collection of Colonel's letters.
And Jack Soden being the head of
the CEO
EP
at
Enterprise.
Yeah. And he said, absolutely. And I called up Colonel and I said, you're a great letter writer. He says, I know I am. And so it would have been a collection of letters, except that Lisa Marie sold the estate around that time, and it took a long time. I mean, a lot of events intervened. It took a long time to get back there. And in the meantime, I started talking to Colonel's widow, Loanne, whom I also knew. And I saw the letters as offering an entry point into a completely different side, not just of Colonel, but of Elvis's career. It was like looking from the other side of the mirror. The events didn't change, but you were seeing it from a totally different perspective. Well, around that time, Colonel's widow, Loanne, whom I knew, I told her what I was doing, and she became engaged by this. And there's no wife or no spouse who ever loved her husband more, and she admired him even more than that. But she was determined, not just that he get his place in history, which he certainly didn't have then and probably doesn't have now, but she was determined to tell the truth, however painful the truth might be, and however difficult it might be So that was how Colonel tricked me into doing this, because I realized this is consider several steps further than the letters alone. And she recalled so many of the stories the Colonel had told her about growing up in Holland, for example. And there are lots of elements of that, but I'll bet few of you know that Colonel was a prepubescent opera singer in Holland growing up. This is true. His aunt, his mother's sister, or one of his mother's sisters, they were traders on the waterways, his mother's family. But one of her sisters was an opera singer. Colonel learned all of the arias that his aunt had sung. He had gone to the operas with his mother, and he would go out on this on this lake outside of Breda, where he grew up, and he would sing these arias, and the rich people in their villas or whatever would come out on their porches and yell, "Bravo, bravo!" And he was in that sense a great lover of music. But those were the kinds of things that I couldn't have gotten from anyone else. But she also worked with him she met him in '69. She was on every tour that Elvis did from '70 on. Or he really didn't start touring until '71. She was in Las Vegas with him, and so she worked with him as well. So it just offered. So I had to do the biography, or a biographical portrait. Let's not call it a full-scale biography.
Well, he's such a mystery to people. It was a mystery for his whole life. And for those, I mean, most of you, I'm sure that here I recognize a lot of faces. You know who the Colonel was. You know he's a longtime manager of Elvis Presley. You know the controversy. You know the things that you have heard about Elvis, the whole thing, the famous line, he's dead, nothing has changed. You hear about the 50-50 deal. You hear about his gambling problem. I mean, the Colonel hasn't been very well regarded at all as far as what he did for Elvis. And I have to say, when I started your book, my opinion of Colonel Parker, and we'll backtrack a little bit with the Dutch stuff, was not very high. And I ended up coming away from reading your book with a completely new appreciation for what he did for Elvis, but also how much he cared for Elvis. But let's go back to the Dutch stuff, which is just fascinating.
I mean, you're cheating there.
Oh, I'm cheating, totally cheating. So he was born, and
I need
and
one
you'll
of
have to you'll have to pronounce this. In 1919 is Andreas Cornelis van
Kirk.
Van Kirk. Oh, a lot easier than I thought.
That's how I
Van
pronounce
Kirk.
it anyway.
And so, but most of his life, he represented himself as a Tennessee colonel, a Texas colonel.
Well, not exactly. I mean, when he came to he was always Andreas von Kirk in Holland. He came to this country.
I meant as a manager.
He was a stowaway. He tried at 16. I mean, America was the land of promise, the land of opportunity, the land it just offered him sort of proportions that Holland, with its very bourgeois kind of self-contained thing, that just wasn't for him. He came over twice when he was 16. He got sent back the first time. The second time he made it and was here for a year and a half. He adopted the name Tom Parker, and I venture a guess as to how he came to do that. When he entered the Army, when he volunteered for the Army, he went in as Tom Parker, but was as a Dutch national. He didn't pretend to be American. And there were a number of Dutch nationals in his, not regiment is the wrong word, company, as there were other foreign-born soldiers. And why this didn't qualify him, probably every other one of them became a citizen. He didn't.
But then later, when he applied for Social Security, he said he was an American citizen, right? Is that correct?
I don't know that said he was an American citizen. He said he was born in Huntington, West Virginia. That was the legend that he created. And
which is a fascinating story unto itself. If we can backtrack just a little bit, go back in time just a little bit, because there's so much to cover with his life.
Yeah, how much time do you
Yeah,
all
we've
have?
we got 19019 all the way to the 90s. Is that he was poor, he was destitute, he was making his way across America, he was a tramp, he was a hobo, and then at some point, which I found one of the most interesting parts of the book, he finds himself at this family's door that takes him in for a while, and so.
Well, this was a case where he was beaten up, he was set upon. George Hamilton, the actor, was a true disciple of Colonel's, and said the Colonel's great lesson was never trust anyone too quickly, do not trust. I mean, he said this goes completely against the image people have of me, but it was the truest thing he ever learned from Colonel. Colonel did not yield his trust easily. And here he was, I think 17 or 18 years old, hoboing across the country. And okay, nobody's going to, okay, in Portsmouth, Ohio, now I want the ding to go off there because I actually remembered something. But in Portsmouth, Ohio, which is kind of a sister city to Huntington, West Virginia, it's quite close, and it's a railroad hub. He was beaten up by other older guys who were hoboing, and all of his money was taken, and he found his way to a black couple's home, and they took him in. I don't know for how long. And I mean, this is a reconstruction I've done, and I don't want you to take this to the bank or go to Las Vegas and bet on this or anything, because I can't certify it 100%. But the thing is, he told Loanne about a black couple taking him in after this event. In her account of his life, which was not that strict, this is Loanne, is Colonel's widow, his second wife, and in her account, his arrival in Huntington took place chronologically right after that. And anyway, but the point is, he described to her how this black couple took her in. When I was researching the book, and I had all these people in Huntington trying to match up the Colonel's mythic account, and it didn't match up. But in what you said, his Social Security application, he put down his mother and father's names, and there were two names. His mother's name was Maria, or Maria in Dutch, and Ponzi, and that entered into it. But there were two names that entered into the identification of his parents. And we looked and looked and looked, and finally the only two, I never thought of this, but the only two names that came up were the names of a black couple in Portsmouth, Ohio. And so it's I think this is likely to be true. I can't certify that it is, but that's where he got his identity. That's why he said he was born in Huntington, West Virginia, right next to Portsmouth, close to it, because in fact his identity was born in that place. Yeah. And he then always said he mixed together his Dutch origins. He had used the same birth date. He interspersed anecdotes from his life in Holland to take place in this country. But basically, so anyway, and you said about being colonel, he was eventually in 1948 or so got an honorary colonel's appointment from Jimmy Davis, the songwriter of "You Are My Sunshine." So that alone should show how.
But he was always very deprecating about it. He never took it seriously. It was always kind of a joke.
And he always referred to himself as a phony colonel.
Yeah.
And he even referred at one point about it how he'd had a horse named for him called Little Colonel. And he says, how many phony colonels do you know who have a horse named for them too? So he did not take it seriously.
So much of the bedrock of Colonel Parker's story and Tom Parker's story and everything that he learned came out of working in the carnival business. Mm-hmm. And so tell us about how he comes in from being an immigrant coming to this country and working and hoboing around, how he comes into, I know he liked carnivals back in Holland, that he had affinity for animals and that kind of thing. So tell us about the early days of him falling in, because that seems like his basis for everything he learned was in that business.
Well, his father took care of the horses for a famous, I'm trying to remember what it's called, not Droy, well, it doesn't matter. It was a big cartage company. And he created his own circus carnival with those horses. He trained these big, plodding work horses, and he trained them like the horses that he saw in the circus. And he had a pet crow that did tricks, and he would invite his family and local children who would come in and maybe pay a little bit. But he loved the circus. He loved the carnival. He loved what he called the wonderful world of entertainment. There was nothing else he believed in. He did not believe in religion or anything like that. He believed in the world of entertainment. And the carnival, in some ways, before he entered into the music business, which was very much like the Grand Ole Opry, the touring shows were exactly like the carnival in the sense that they traveled into areas that had never seen a show before, brought this wonderful, unrepeatable kind of entertainment that it was like television when it first arrived. People were, able to see something they had never seen before. That was one reason why he believed so much in entertainment, in the wonderful world of entertainment. But the other thing had to do with when you entered into the world of the carnival. And today, carnivals have a bad name. In the 30s, carnivals and the circuses were covered fully as much as Broadway shows. I mean, I'm talking about in variety, in the, just in the entertainment weeklies, as Broadway, as vaudeville, as opera, as page after page about the, the paths of the carnivals, where they traveled. And Colonel even became, in his last trip with the carnivals, he became, as well as the advance man, the manager for the carnival, he also became the correspondent of Variety and would file reports weekly. And they're all about, I saw so-and-so in Paducah, and remember when he was with this carnival, well, now he's doing this, he's running a movie house. But there was nothing nefarious about the about the carnivals. Maybe late at night after the women and children have been sent home. I'm not saying things didn't go on, but it was not.
But he loved the lifestyle. He loved packing up, going to the next city, and of course that echoes what happens later with Elvis in the '70s. But he loved the nomadic lifestyle of starting over and making contacts and
setting up the tent.
And he was great at it. I mean,
yes.
He was great at being the front guy. And as you said, one of his favorite things, he never deviated from hurry, hurry, hurry. The immediacy.
Don't you dare miss it.
Don't miss it.
Yeah, but he absolutely loved it, and that was what, when he entered into the country music world to begin with Eddie Arnold, with the Grand Ole Opry touring show. That's what it was. That's exactly what it was. But the one other thing about the world of the carnival, or the world of entertainment in general, was you didn't enter on a pass. You had to prove yourself. You were accepted on the basis of your character, not where you came from, not your station in life, not what you boasted about, not your education, purely on the basis of character. And he felt, and he continued to feel this way all his life, and continued to be in touch with all these carnies and carnival folk, and placed them far above, maybe the highly educated phony or something.
Somebody worked for a major Hollywood agency or somebody like that.
Yeah,
he felt they had more ethics.
But that was it. You were judged on the basis of your character, and you were judged on the basis of your word. And the one thing, and this runs totally counter, as you say, runs totally counter to the image the Colonel had since Elvis's death. I mean, before that he had been highly regarded, but after Elvis's death, the image that many of you may have, or maybe all of you have, is what attached to Colonel. But the point was that every single person that I've met, and that's a lot of people who did business with Colonel, said he was somebody you could trust completely. If he shook hands with you, if he shook on something, he was true to every element of the deal.